May the words of my lips and the meditations of my heart be pleasing unto you, O my Lord and Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Please sit down. I first remember hearing the parable of the Good Samaritan when I was 7 or so, and in school in a small mining village in South Yorkshire where I grew up. And it struck me then that this was a model for how we should behave, that we were being very clearly drawn to behave like the Good Samaritan and take care of our neighbour. I don't remember being told what a Levite or a priest was, but they drew the message very clearly for us. They were much less shy in those days about telling children what they should and shouldn't think. And so I grew up very much believing in this as the way of life, putting ourselves out for our neighbours. And, very often, and this is true in my case, I didn't really think about it again, ever, until, for some reason, perhaps somebody asks you to write a sermon, that you're forced to think about it again. And I was very struck when I did that again, that this little parable is capable of other meanings, other interpretations, other than the strict morality tale. Of course, it doesn't stop it being a morality tale, but there are other ways of interpreting. I'm thinking also of parables like the workers in the vineyard or the parable of the talents, where we see items being given other meanings than the literal meaning in the text. And this particular parable, the parable of the Good Samaritan, has been over the years, over centuries, been thought of as a model, as an allegory, as a metaphor for God's plan of salvation for us.
That's the clock.
And
that's all right. No, you're welcome.
we don't normally, when we start to think about parables, start to think about how the parable is introduced. But in this case, we do. We get that reading of beforehand. And it's very important to understand that reading and take that reading on board as a way of understanding what's going on. So we have the Pharisee, the lawyer, saying, "Teacher, what do I have to do to gain salvation?" "Well, it's very easy," says Jesus. "All you have to do is love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and with all your soul. Oh, and by the way, you have to love your neighbour as yourself."
Thank you very much.
"And who is my neighbour?" asked the Pharisee. Well, that's a good question. Jesus doesn't say. He tells him a little story instead. And so we have the parable of the Good Samaritan to tell us who is the neighbour. It's a little bit more complicated than you would first think, because to us, the neighbour is somebody who lives in the same street or maybe the same district. But that's not the case for Jesus. The word that is used in the original Greek version of this story, and I know you might think this is a bit nerdy, and it is, but then, guys, I've got to have some fun, is actually not about being a neighbour, but by being close. So Jesus is talking about people who you are close to. So that could include family and friends. But the important thing that we have to grasp here is that Jesus is saying, a Samaritan, who you've all despised for centuries, is also your neighbour. He behaves as a neighbour, as a close person to you, you beaten down person. So by implication, you are close to him. And people we are close to, people we love, they sometimes ask us for help, and we feel that we have the right to ask them for help too. So that's the kind of relationship that Jesus is saying, you, Mr. Pharisee, need to have with me, God. Close family relationship. In terms of the overall picture, the way I like to look at this in terms of an allegory, not just a morality tale, is that on the one hand we have the shining city, we have Jerusalem, the city of God, the holy city, on a hill, and we have Jericho down in a valley, some meters below sea level, literally below sea level. And human beings, mankind, who I identify as the beaten down man, are on their journey. Now we're fallen, so we're actually on a journey downhill, really. But along that way, somewhere along that path of fall, we're assailed by all sorts of sins, by the forces of the enemy. And we're beaten down, and we're beaten half dead. We're dead to life, half dead to life. We are half looking to Christ, looking up to God for salvation, and we're half living in sin, beaten down and dead to life, dead in sin. So that's where we are. Along comes our Samaritan, who we identify in my interpretation as Jesus. And it's common enough, isn't it, these days, to find that people despise the concept of God and Jesus. They don't like it. But it's real nonetheless. And the history between the Samaritans and the Jews was a very fraught history. You know, what is happening in Palestine at the moment is not new for Palestine. It's been going on literally for thousands of years. And there was all these horrible things happening. So these are people, the Samaritans and the Jews, who didn't like each other, despised one another, hated one another. And yet, the Samaritan feels close enough to this beaten down humanity to help. Picks him up, pops him on his donkey, and off they go to the inn. When they get to the inn, in my interpretation, which we can think of as the church, Jesus hands humanity, humankind, sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, over to the care of the innkeeper to look after in church, where they can be refreshed, loved, repaired, made new. And that's certainly my experience of church, and I hope very much it's been your experience. Jesus then says to him, Here are 2 denarii. Perhaps they are the 2 commandments that we've just heard, on which all the law and the prophets lie. Love God, love your fellow man. And Jesus says, or the Samaritan says, I'm going now, and I will be back, and I will make everything right. To me, this all sounds very, very familiar. And this, to me, is where I think, yes, this parable is a model for our behaviour. It is a model not only for a moral tale, but also a model of God's plan for salvation. So what does that mean? What does that mean for us here today? Well, perhaps it means that we need to open our eyes, expand our minds to take into account Jesus' view of what a neighbour is. That is somebody else, somebody who is close to us, either physically or emotionally, but close. And he includes the whole world in that, even people we have done harm to in the past, or who, more importantly, have done harm to us. He picks up the half-dead. He picked them up then, and he picks them up now. And he carries them into church, into a community where they can be loved and supported. So when we think about people who want to come to this country, say on small boats, or people we see on the streets who are begging, homeless, perhaps assailed by sin, assailed by alcoholism or drug abuse or simply atrocious behaviour that's got them to that situation, then we need to look at them not as a basket case, but as our neighbour, as our close ones, and treat them accordingly. The funny thing is, what's just come to me, as I've been saying that, is that nobody ever said this was going to be easy, did they? It's not easy to love those other people, the smelly ones, the ones who don't understand, who can't understand, whose behaviour is erratic, those ones who we are worried about, we're frightened of because they're coming on small boats and we wonder what they're up to. And those that we resent, maybe because they've got a place in a hotel and the person living on the streets hasn't. We need to look at this for ourselves, and we need to make, when we go out of here, we need to go and make something different. Because this place where we are drawn by Jesus Christ to come and be in community together, where we can be supported, loved, refreshed, renewed, the last part of that is, and sent out again to work in the world for God's kingdom.